I'm currently working in the Faculty of Music, and I'm exploring the music of the 19th century British Jewish community and looking how they use music to express their joint Jewish and British identity. Through this research, I found quite a striking connection between the British Jewish community of the 19th century and the Tractarian movement, the Anglo-Catholic movement, which sort of happened around about the same time. They both stemmed out, or sort of the Reform movement, which happened in Judaism at the same time, both stemmed out of discontent in the synagogue and the church. If you look at the next slide. So here's some examples of some of the comments made about the Anglican Church in the 18th and 19th century. So the pulpit and the fonts were being used more like storage units, either for clothes or for cleaning products. And people were sitting on the altar-railed communion table, so not really appreciating the sacred space. Similarly, in the synagogue, you get comments about the cantors, the chazanim, sort of just waxing lyrical with their melodies, not really paying much attention to the text. It meant that the congregation got bored, started chatting, usually about business or finance. And at the same time, you have this strange custom where the community were actually almost auctioning some of the blessings that were happening during the services. So you'd get this sale of blessings going on at the same time as the service. In response to this, around about the 1830s, both communities, both movements, started to suggest ideas to improve decorum in the services and improve devotion. So in the 1830s, you start to get the Tractarians, so these were a group of academics and clergy in Oxford, coming up with a set of regulations of how to improve behaviour in church services. About the same time, you start getting members of synagogues suggesting all similar sort of recommendations to improve services. In 1839, the regulations that the Tractarians had introduced, particularly with regards to music, sparked off what was been known as a choral revival in the Anglican Church. So you start getting introductions of choirs and choral music, which was a sort of quintessential British sound, but also improved the structure of services, encouraged congregational participation. Just a year later, you get the foundation of the West London Synagogue of British Jews, which was the first Reform synagogue in Britain. One of their promises was to incorporate choral music. And the following year, you hear the first choirs in synagogue services. So there's a very close connection in terms of their timeline, but also in terms of their musical style in both the church and the synagogue. If you add to this the geographical spread of the two movements, there's something particularly striking. And I'm going to focus on two particular institutions to make this point. On the left here, you've got the West London Synagogue of British Jews, obviously in West London. This is its current building on Upper Berkeley Street. And on the right, you have All Saints Church, which is in Margaret Street, also in West London. So as the Oxford movement or Tractarian movement sort of sparked interest across the rest of the country, there was quite a heavy focus in London. All Saints Church became sort of the base for Tractarian worship and is still used today. If we look at the two on a map, so if you just click again, you've got All Saints Church, Margaret Street, sort of in the middle, and Upper Berkeley Street, West London Synagogue, just slightly off the map on the left. As you can see, this was the building that the West London Synagogue used from 1870. The synagogue was founded in 1840. So where were they before that? They had a prior building, thank you, on Burton Street from 1842, which is where they held their first services. They soon outgrew that building and moved to a second building, which is often ignored in the history of the West London Synagogue. It's neither the first building where they moved to, nor is it the grand building that you see today. But if you look, it was also on Margaret Street. And if you look at the dates as well, they moved to Margaret Street in 1849. The Tractarian movement had actually sort of taken over what had been a dissenters' chapel in the 1830s, and by 1850, so a year later than the West London Synagogue moved to Margaret Street, they started building to make it sort of the official site for the Tractarian movement in London. Interestingly, Burton Street had also been a dissenters' chapel, so there's the link there. The other interesting date to look at is that the Tractarian movement, the All Saints' Church, was finally consecrated in 1859, the same year that the West London Synagogue was refurbished and an organ was installed. So there were even closer links between what the West London Synagogue were doing musically and what the Tractarians were doing, so introducing both choral music and the organ. This needs more research, and I'm sort of still looking into it, particularly in terms of, in such close proximity, what were the social interactions and what were their sort of shared musical experiences as well. But this has been a godsend in terms of my research, because I've been arguing for sort of more prominence of Jewish music in sort of mainstream 19th century music studies, and to be able to show that you've got these two movements which for 20 years shared a street in West London is quite something. So, thank you.